welcome and glad to have you.
Yeah, actually, I will just say, I guess probably more interested here is the kids, right? Like, so I have a third grader who's dyslexic and at Claremont, and I have a 4-year-old who's not yet in APS. So that's actually probably far more interested in school.
All right.
Excellent. Welcome.
We won't make you say like your favorite food and, you know, little known fact or anything like that. Okay. So with that, the minutes from last month went out, and before we vote, are there any comments on the September minutes that were issued in the email?
Nope.
Okay, seeing none, do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
All right, is there a second?
Second that.
All right, using your reaction button for a thumbs up, all of those who are in favor, give me a thumbs up, or some other way to, raise hands. That might be better, because I guess the thumbs up goes away. All right. 2. And motion carries. Okay. All right. Next on our agenda is public comment. Is there anyone other than Josh here for public comment? Big none. Josh, as always, you have the floor.
Well, I will be brief. For our new member, my name is Josh Folb. I am the compensation chair for the Arlington Education Association. In my work, of course, I'm advocating for the salaries and benefits of employees, but I also try to bring to this committee my annotations of presentations that may come to the school board, and I'll bring my various salary comparisons for the region. In my personal life, I am also happen to be a math teacher at one of the high schools in the county. I'm at W&L now. My wife is first grade at Hoffman Boston, and my son is in the virtual learning program and still has its challenges trying to iron out. He's still looking for a math teacher. So there's that. The one thing I will discuss with, 2 things that I would discuss with the group is just that you've heard about the Great Resignation of, that they've been talking about, of 2021. And I would say that I don't have the hard data, though you can see the data that come through the consent reports, that I've had more staff members talking to me about, well, what would it be if I left right now? How would that affect my retirement? More than I've ever had conversations with people, certainly in October. These are usually April, May, June conversations with people. So it's certainly an interesting times when it comes to that. One of the things that in the before times we talk about with the AEA, that the 3 pillars of compensation have to be to talk about the COLA, market rate competitiveness, and then market rate comparison, the STEP, and the COLA. And the one thing we were talking about through AEA was the idea of tying the COLA to the cost of living adjustment for Social Security. In the before times when I talked about this, and it was in the 1% to 2% range, most people would buy in perfectly reasonably to it. And I certainly hope that when it's now at 5.9%, that people don't retract and say, well, maybe we don't need a number that high, because that is certainly the real cost in the region. And my tie to the 5.9 is Republicans and Democrats both hate the number, so it must be a number that we can reasonably agree on. So just that right now, I hope to bring to us next month my salary comparisons of the region for teachers' salaries. One note that our bus drivers, our transportation people have been bringing forth their salary concerns as well. And as the region starts to pick back up and the tour groups return, that also becomes an area that we have to continue to look at. As I learned from my 7th grade teacher, if people can't get there, nothing else matters. So transportation is quite critical. I'll end this and then throw my hat on to say I'm chair in my other life. I am chair of ACTC, the Arlington Committee on Transportation Choices. And if you have any fiscally minded people who also have an interest in transportation, we would love some members sent our way. So we are always recruiting, just as Budget Advisory is always recruiting. So with that, if there are any questions for me, I really didn't bring a whole lot to the table today, but I would love any questions. And like I said, I'll bring my charts to the next meeting.
Any questions for Josh from the team? Okay. All right, Josh, thank you.
Hey, thank you. And I wish everyone well.
Okay. And knowing that Monique has a bit of a drive ahead of her, Monique, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you, Chuck. And so good to see everybody. I'm so happy for your service. Welcome to Jennifer as well, joining the awesome crew that we have here. Chuck asked me to talk a little bit about the school board budget direction, which has been adopted. And this is an important document because this lets the superintendent know what our expectations are for him when he brings his budget to us in the beginning of the next year. And some of the things that I'm just going to go through the document that I know Chuck sent over earlier. The first thing that's important to know is that this budget direction does mirror the school board priorities, especially with a focus on ensuring student well-being and also with a concentration on literacy and math this year. Social, emotional, and especially those two core content areas are a keen interest of the school board as we get back to full in-person learning. And we are hoping to see that the staff and the superintendent follow up with actions, work, and fiscal responsibility to help support those areas currently and in the future. In addition to that, of course, we always want to advance our strategic plan goals, which include student well-being and success, an engaged workforce, partnerships, and operational excellence. And you're going to see a lot of that also in the upcoming bullet points that we have for our budget direction. One of the things that you guys saw at the end of the last budget cycle was that we tried to put more intentionality towards our staff by going a little bit further than the superintendent had proposed to support our staff with their compensation. And I think that you're going to continue to see that again. We do know it's important to recruit, hire, and retain our staff. And one of the things that we heard was very disconcerting to them last year was that we're falling behind on compensation. And that's something we have to take seriously because we've been hearing in the past that there is a lot of pressure on actual the teacher workforce. And I think we're starting to feel that. I think we saw that at the beginning of this year. I think we're going to continue to see it more following COVID. And so we want to make a priority of coming together with a plan that can, in a systematic way, increase all of our salary scales. And we had some work done previously on that to try to make sure that we are market competitive. We're going to see, I think, a plan from the superintendent to help figure out how we can move forward in that work. And that's going to also be especially important as we move towards collective bargaining, which will take some time to implement, but we need to start planning for that. And that is going to be something that's going to cost money. So we have to also plan to make sure that we can move forward on collective bargaining and have the staff in place and the systems in place to support that process. So we do know that salary is going to be important. We've already let the county board know that this is something that we want to definitely look at so that we can be able to reclaim that we are market competitive and that our staff can expect good salaries and that can help us retain and recruit folks. So the county board is already aware of that. And we hope that that's something that we can work with them to try to instill in a systematic way as we move forward. Now let's talk about operational efficiency. One of the things I think we learned in COVID is that APS has really been trying to put a lot of their money towards supporting their students and maybe has held back a little bit on some of the advancements that might cost a little bit of money. Larger school districts cannot do that. They need to have the bells and whistles because they have so many students that they can't do a lot of things by hand. We want to look at the ability to be able to move forward and make sure that we are able to meet the needs and the challenges that we have in terms of making sure that we have the systems in place to move in a way that can help us be more nimble and meet our needs. But that also means that we want to try to figure out how we can make sure that we can have the best operations while also making sure that we can find some cost savings. So we'll be looking at that. And we're going to try to make sure that we can continue to collaborate across our departments so that we can try to meet our budget within our student needs. You guys are aware that what we did with our rescue fund dollars to make sure that we could balance our budget so that we were in the best shape to meet all of our students' needs as they return to school. And as we move forward, what we're going to do is to recommend some changes. Here are some of the things that we'd like to see the superintendent do. We want to make sure that we look at best ways that we can make some strategic changes to make sure that we're promoting what our kids need in the best way possible. We're going to take a look at adjusting our enrollment projections so that the dollars can be spent where they're needed, and that we are meeting the needs and planning for spending dollars for the students who are going to be in our system. We're going to take a look at our use of reserves and looking at changing some fee schedules and do other different ideas to try to make sure that we can balance our budget. In addition to that, we're going to take a look at some of our internal systems, and I talked a little bit about that earlier. What do we need to do to make sure that we can be more strategic when it comes to transportation and routing? That may mean that we need to upgrade some of our systems. What can we do to make sure that our human resources run much more strategically, and also that we have what we need to meet the needs of our staff? We're also going to be looking at budgeting and financial management software. We want to make sure that the systems we have in place don't get in the way of us finding efficiencies. And sometimes you need to make sure that you have the best systems in place to allow us to do that. And we think if we make some of these changes, we may be able to look at zero-based budgeting in future years. I know that's something that the BAC was interested in. This year, we are going with needs-based budgeting. We understand that zero-based budgeting is going to take some time. And we think if we have the systems in place, then we can potentially look at doing that in the future. We're going to ask for a transparent budget so that the community will understand if changes are coming in effect with this. And that can be everything from, as you see, this, if we're making major changes to full-time employees, salaries, benefits, purchase services. So we want to make sure that when the superintendent brings his budget forward, if there are significant changes, that the community can easily tell what they are. We do know that the BAC had asked for us to consider doing 3-year forecasts, and that's one of the things we'd like to see as well. And of course, with all of our work, we want to make sure that we are meeting the requirements for the federal government, the state government, and our local laws as well. That's a walkthrough of what we have passed for our budget direction. I'm here to answer questions.
Monique, thank you. Yeah, definitely a little bit different look to the budget direction than perhaps in years past. You know, especially some of the areas that I know our reports have addressed. So I think, you know, speak for those of us who've been at this a couple of years, that it appears at least that some of the ideas have started to come forth. And so I think that helps us, you know, we talk about relevance, and that makes it important for us, I think, to know that some of the ideas, we don't have to always agree, but some of those that we do see as important are coming through. As you look to, another challenging year where we have deficit, potential deficit, and how we try to strike a balance with this. You mentioned collective bargaining, and for those of us that may not be as familiar with that, can you give us a little bit of context of what that might look like in the sense of our setting with the Budget Advisory Council, and just how that's going to impact the work that we do looking ahead to February and beyond?
Well, I think we're going to have to figure out, first off, we have to plan to put this in place. And then once collective bargaining is moving forward, there's different hires that have to be put in place. There's different processes. And so there is going to be a financial impact. I cannot actually lay out what that full financial impact is. But we do know that it requires different offices. It requires different protocols, and that therefore it's going to require funding to be able to ensure that that can move forward. And so I know that the county board has already embarked on that a little bit earlier than we have, but those discussions are going to happen, and there's at least going to be some additional FTEs that have to be put in place to be able to start that process. So it's going to mean a little bit more, and I can't really go into it more than that. I think it's going to depend on how the process moves forward, and it hasn't just yet moved forward. So,
sure. And the timing of all this, just so we have a sense of where on the calendar this might fall.
Well, I think first it has to be put into the budget, and so the budget will not be passed until, as you know, later in the school year. And so I don't think that you're going to have a good understanding, and those fiscal impacts are going to happen until next year. Obviously, we don't have those financial relevancies in this current budget. So it's more about planning right now than it is moving the process forward.
Okay. Looks like Jen has a question.
Hey, Jen. Jen, I can't hear you. Now I can hear you.
No, I don't have a question. Did I do something?
Jen Wagner.
Eric's light was on. Eric was glowing yellow. Eric, did you have something?
I did actually. I turned it on, turned it off, but I do have a question. I did see in the board direction for the budget that there was a call out to talk specifically about the fact that last year we had to make deep cuts, and we still had to use 40 million in one-time funds to balance the budget. Roughly half of that coming from the federal government, and then half coming from reserves. Was there any discussion about, and you talked about some of the things I think that provide direction on where we might be able to help bridge that deficit coming forward, but given that our 90% of our operating budget is in compensation, it probably can't get there. Were there other things talked about as well to help us try and figure out how we address that gap that we should, barring a huge increase in revenues this coming year, that we're going to face again?
So I think that you saw some of the board's thinking on that when it comes to efficiencies, when it comes to having the superintendent let us know if there are different changes that can be made based on his creative look at making sure that we are operating as strategically and fiscally responsibly as possible. I think some of the other areas that can come in is when the board mentioned looking at our projections, because definitely staff is a major aspect of our outlays, but staff is based on the number of students we have. And so as we're looking at projections, we want to make sure those are totally in line. And that, I think, is one other area.
And then others might have questions about the budget direction, but I did see that the capital improvement, there was a discussion or proposed discussion on the capital improvement plan. And I didn't know if you had any comments around that or on things that we should be thinking about for that.
Well, you definitely want to keep an eye on the capital improvement plan. Many of the things in that capital improvement plan are paid for via bond dollars.
Yeah.
And so, you'll want to keep an eye on where that goes, because that will impact what we go out to the community for to request bond funding. One of the things that I think we got some good news on is that the county is anticipating a little bit of maybe better times than we had anticipated. And so that could help with us addressing some of our capital building needs for our system.
Okay. Melanie.
Hey, Melanie.
Hi, how are you?
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Can you talk to me a little more about the transparency? I know that is something that we have talked about in over the past year or two about how to get more transparency in the budget. I loved seeing that in the budget direction. But I know that there's transparency after the budget, which is fantastic, of really making sure everyone understands it, because it's a complex budget and there's a lot of anxiety that comes along with it. What do these changes mean, and what's behind the numbers, and what are we missing? But we've always also talked about if there are big things being contemplated, if the community can get some idea of them before the budget drops, so that there can be dialogue about what feels palatable or right, or too soon, or too big, or too large, or too small, or whatever before the budget drops. And is there any of that type of transparency contemplated here, so that there's more dialogue about what could be in the budget ahead of the budget dropping in February?
I think that's a good question, Melanie. I can't speak to that in particular, but what I can speak to is that I think the board wants, when the superintendent does bring his budget, because this is about the superintendent bringing his budget, that is clear to the community when he brings his budget if there are major changes. And that is really, I think, what this budget direction is saying. For example, if we go back to a few years ago, when it was suggested that we had to drop less to be able to handle some other pressures in the budget. That was a big gulp for some members of our community. And we don't want that to kind of, something like that to kind of trickle out. I think when that idea was brought, I think it was brought very transparently. And so the idea is, if there are going to be big changes in our system, superintendent, when you bring your budget, make sure that it is clear that you are changing something that the community has relied on and basically expects to be there. And so that is the direction I believe we're giving the superintendent. He uses every minute of preparation time to get that budget to us and to the community. And I don't know that there's time for him to float ideas, but I can tell you that when he brings his budget forward, we are asking for it to be clear if there are major changes. And that's, I think, what the budget direction is.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's very helpful. Although I will say there are some changes we may need to make given the gaps in future years, where if you start the conversation early, you get more of the community's input, because they may need to be shaped in more than for a longer period of time, or with more community input. So it's not so much about floating ideas, and I completely understand this is a big budget, a complex budget, and I know that you can't talk lightly about things in advance, and he definitely, and his team, uses every minute. So it's not about that, but it is about the fact that we may need over the next few years to make some big decisions, and getting community input on things like that, so the community is ready for them, would be a positive thing. So I know you and I have talked about this, but it's just registering it again for you and for the group.
I appreciate that, Melanie. Thank you. And this does not preclude the superintendent from saying, we do this now, we're going to have to slowly phase it out. So this does not preclude him from doing what you're saying. I'm not saying that he will do it, but it depends on what the needs are in his budget. And then, of course, the school board has the opportunity to be able to go back and have an impact. One of the things I think you will see in terms of phasing, and I think we were clear in asking for it, is a phased way to approach additional compensation for our staff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is great to see. Thank you.
Okay. Last question for Melanie. Jennifer.
Yeah, Monique, I just wanted to clarify your comments about the county to make sure I understood. You mentioned that they had referenced that there might be sort of better times for this year or ahead or whatever. And you specifically referenced that with regards to capital improvement projects. But I just wanted to clarify, are you talking about the 47% revenue sharing, sort of in better times influencing that? Or are you talking about sort of capital improvement and as financed through bonds and things like that?
Thanks for asking, Jennifer. Actually, I wasn't referring to there being a change in the revenue sharing agreement. I was just referring to we've had some tough times, and I think the county has shown just even recently that it's moving into I guess opening up its ability to be able to do things like give its staff a little bit more of a raise. That we knew that COVID was really going to hit us hard, and it seems as though now we might be kind of coming on the other end of that. So that's what I meant by that. I appreciate you asking the clarifying question.
Okay. All right, Monique, I know you got a little bit of a drive ahead of you, so if there are no other questions from Monique, thank you.
Thanks, you guys. It's great to see you.
Okay.
Thank you, Monique.
Thank you.
All right, we'll transition now. So from last meeting, we talked about, and I'll address at the end the survey results that I sent out, and I think, give us a good gauge of how to chart our course for agenda items going forward. But always helpful up front, even for those of us who've been at this a few years, just to get an understanding of the makeup of the budget itself, and for Leslie to help sharpen some focus on the areas that we must pay attention to, and the areas that while they are certainly interesting, when you're talking $40 million deficits, they don't really contribute a whole lot. So just Leslie kind of laying out what we call Budget 101, just giving a helpful guide to understanding broad makeup of how APS's budget is structured. And, as we think about the work that we have ahead, given what Monique has just given us about the budget direction, how do we kind of put the two together as we think about February when the budget's delivered and the work that we'll have, after the budget delivery. So I'll turn the floor over to Leslie, our Assistant Superintendent for Everything Money, and give us a good rundown on where things stand, and just again help us just understand the basics before we decide to go forward and talk about special topics.
Thanks, Chuck. Sorry I wasn't on camera before. I was trying to eat my dinner. As I'm sure all of you are aware. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if I can pull this up. Here we go. Hopefully everybody can see that.
Yep, we got it.
Camera off during this part. Right, come on. Okay, here we go. So before I start, I want to just give you a little background on this presentation. We did this a couple of years ago, mainly as an educational tool for internal clients, like our principals and department heads and whatnot, just to give them, we found when we were discussing some things that there was some confusion or some lack of clarity around exactly how the departmental budgets work. This is mainly focused on departmental budgets because I think we all, we'll talk about schools in a minute, but this is mainly focused on the departmental budgets and the overall budget. And there was some lack of clarity, so we put this presentation together, and it also ended up being a really great educational tool for the BAC. What we haven't done since we did this presentation in 2020 is update it, and because it takes some time, and you'll see why in a little bit. But the educational foundation of the presentation doesn't change. It gives you the information that you need even if it might be the numbers that are in the FY22 budget, it's the FY2020 budget. But the theory still holds. And so rather than spending a lot of time trying to update this, we're just going to present it as is. I do have some updated information from the FY22 budget at the end. And then, of course, feel free to ask any questions along the way, although I won't be able to see your hands more than likely. If someone could just, if you have a question, Chuck, if you could just let me know that someone has a question along the way.
Okay. Yep. Happy to moderate.
All right. So as I said, this is the FY 2020 adopted budget. And the first thing we're looking at is the overall budget as it split out into the different funds. If you didn't know, we have 8 different funds, one of which is not in the annual budget, and that's the bond fund. And then we have these 7 other funds. We have the debt service fund, and that is where we have the funds to pay our debt service each year on our bonds. The Children's Services Act Fund, which is a mandated fund for placement of special education students in conjunction with the county. It used to be called the Community Services Act. Now it's the Children's Services Fund. We have our Grants and Restricted Programs Fund, which is mostly made up of our title funds and our IDEA. And for those of you who don't know what those are federal funds that are provided to school districts for various things. Title I for economically disadvantaged students, Title II, Title III have to do with EL and professional development. And then IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is for our special education students. So all, plus other grants that we might have are all contained within the Grants and Restricted Programs Fund. Our Food and Nutrition Services Fund, this is how we fund our school breakfast and lunch every year. And that fund is separate. It has been primarily federally funded, although there have also been local funds, mainly from students who buy lunch and from adults who buy lunch and from a little bit of catering that the Food and Nutrition Services Division does for other schools and for within the school district. Right now, however, because we are under the seamless summer option under the federal government, all students are eating free. So we have absolutely no revenue coming into the Food and Nutrition Services Fund that is outside of federal funding. So only federal funding is coming in right now. Capital projects, that is our annual budget for maintenance, for minor construction and major maintenance in the school division. It is not the bond funded projects. It is those projects that we fund with what we call current revenue, typically under $500,000, and we pay cash for those because they don't rise to the level of bond funding. And then the Community Activities Fund, frankly, is a holdover from before the revenue sharing agreement, when the county provided money to the operating budget and then money to the Community Activities Fund separately, because it contains primarily the joint use facilities that we have, like the community centers that are attached to our schools, Thomas Jefferson and Gunston being 2 big ones that come to mind. I think probably in the future we could consider getting rid of the Community Activities Fund and then subsuming it in the school operating fund. But for now, it helps to show what items are really joint operations with the county versus just the school system. So, and then the school operating fund, which pays for everything else, all the daily activities of the school system. transportation, teachers, human resources, payroll, finance, information services, all of the different aspects of the school division that are concerned with the everyday running of the school district. All right, so talked about all those. Sorry, forgot that I needed to go ahead. So we have all the different funds, and then we have the school operating fund. And you can see all the other different funds when we're looking at a $670 million budget. That's what it was back in 2020. 116 million of that is in those separate funds. And so the large majority, of course, is in the school operating fund, almost 83% in 2020. I think it might be more now. And this is what we're going to talk about, the school operating fund. We're not going to talk about the various other funds at the moment. We're just going to talk about the school operating fund. And then within the school operating fund, there are, I'm trying to get this moved. I don't know if you guys can see that, but it's blocking my view. There are all of the schools, and then there are all of the departments. And the schools are on the left and the departments on the right. And you can see how the operating budget is split out between the schools and all the rest of the departments. And then the size of the various departments you can see there. Now, this is before the reorganization that took place July 1 and is reflected in the FY22 budget. So teaching and learning is now split, and various pieces went in various directions. So they are a little bit smaller, but a lot of the things that I'm going to say still apply. And so we have now, of course, the chief academic office and the chief school support office, rather than teaching and learning. But you can see the various departments. We have the school board office, obviously very, very small. Teaching and learning, superintendent's office, planning and evaluation, which is actually part of the superintendent's office, or actually the chief of staff office now, because we have that now. Human resources, administrative services, that's now under the school support, finance, school and community relations, facilities and operations, and information services. So as you might expect, teaching and learning is the biggest piece. Facilities and operations, which includes transportation, is the next largest, followed by human resources, and then information services, etc. So if you want to find out, if we're going to talk about each of the various departments, and again, I apologize because this doesn't reflect the new reorganization, but we just did not have the time to update this to reflect the new reorganization. But in the Department of Teaching and Learning, you think, oh my God, this huge budget, right? $62 million, $62.6 million back in the FY 2020 budget. Who are all these people that are in the Department of Teaching and Learning, and why do we have so much money in the Department of Teaching and Learning? Why aren't we putting it out in the schools? Well, let's look at that. In the Department of Teaching and Learning, there are two pieces of that department. There's the non-school based, those that are really central office employees. They work in the central office. They work with teachers or principals or other folks, maybe instructional assistants. They don't work directly with students. And then we have all of the school-based people, staff, that actually do go out into the schools every day and work directly with students. They're housed, costed to the Department of Teaching and Learning for various reasons. But one of the major reasons is because they're itinerant and they serve various schools. They don't just serve one school, and they're evaluated by someone other than the principal of a school. So their evaluations are done by somebody in the central office versus a principal doing the evaluation on those staff. So From this, you can see that the number of school-based staff that were housed in the Department of Teaching and Learning in that $62.6 million budget are much higher than the number of non-school-based staff. And you know, that's the way it should be. We should have a lot of people more dedicated to the students in the schools than in the central office. So that's one of the reasons that the Department of Teaching and Learning budget is so high, is because there are so many staff who are housed in that budget. Okay, I'm going to go on. Planning and evaluation is a very small department. It's a little different now, but going back to this, they have 13 staff members in planning and evaluation, and most of the cost in their budget is for those staff that they need for all of the things that they do. They do surveys, they do program evaluations, planning, those kinds of things. So that the staff is the main portion of that budget, and that's what the budget is made up of. Human resources. This is the total human capital back in 2020 that was overseen by human resources. So you can see that it's over 5,000, probably over 6,000 different employees. Not all of them, of course, on a daily basis. In this other category, at about, was that 11 o'clock? There's 2,200 people in that group. A lot of those are substitutes and other hourly workers that we have on the rolls, not necessarily people who are actively needing help from human resources every day. We also have 1,525 retirees as of FY20 who are also serviced by human resources. And the
Leslie,
human resources, yes.
On the retiree piece, is there a cost associated with retirees, or is that just, you know, the HR department handles, you know, their like the stuff with VRS and things of that nature, or is there some financial component to that with the retiree population?
Yes, there's definitely a financial component because the school board contributes towards the retiree health insurance. So if you are a 20-year employee of APS and you retire, the school board pays for your health insurance as if you were a full-time employee.
Okay.
So the retirees with 20 plus years, you know, are getting the same health insurance benefit that I am. So yes, there's a definite cost component there.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So human resources, the various areas in human resources are the human resources, the overall piece of that. Substitutes, only substitutes are in this budget. We have, as of FY20, $3.3 million for substitutes. As you can see from 2018, we spent more than $3.3 million in substitutes, and we've done that just about every year. We are trying to increase the substitute budget, and we've been adding money to the substitute budget every year to try to catch up, and hopefully we'll get there in the next year or two. We have our payroll department, employee benefits, which includes those payments for those retirees, and then our employee assistance program. That is the half of the cost of the employee assistance program. The county does provide, because the county it's a joint employee assistance program with the county, they contribute half of the cost for about half for the employee assistance program. And then you can see the staff that is housed in human resources to take care of all of the employees that we have. Obviously, it went down in FY20. I don't know where it is today, but that's what it is right now, or was then. So in human resources, we have a $6.5 million budget. $5.6 million of that is staffing contingency. And that is the amount of money that we have in our budget, so that when, after the budget is adopted and we start looking at what enrollment looks like, when schools need additional resources because either their enrollment is coming in differently than the way we projected it, or there are more students who have specific needs. So, for example, they have more EL students than was projected, or they have more special education students, or the students that they have higher need, then we would provide additional staffing for them out of the staffing contingency. Because as we know, we can do a really good job projecting the overall enrollment for the school district. The last couple of years notwithstanding, because of the pandemic, but in prior years we were really close. We were at 1% or below 1% accuracy for the school district as a whole. But as with all projections, as you start to go to the lower levels, to the different school levels, elementary, middle, high, and then down to the individual schools, and then down to the individual grade levels, it's not as neat and not as accurate, because that's a lot more difficult to project. So that's what that staffing contingency is for. And then we also have our lapse and turnover, which is included in the human resources budget. That is the savings that we are projecting for the year for any staff who leave and the position is vacant for a period of time, and then savings that we might get from staff who leave and then we hire somebody who has a lower salary than the person who left. And then some other smaller items in there. And then employee benefits, as I said, retiree health care, our separation pay. Our separation pay is for employees who retire and we pay out their leave. That's a large number every year. Our workers' comp, and then some other smaller things. Administrative services, very small department, was now subsumed under this chief of school support, couple of staff, and some small amounts of money to do a couple of things like second chance and alternatives to suspension. Finance, that's my area. We have what looks like a larger budget, but if you'll notice, most of the money is in other admin accounts, 11.7 out of the 14.7. We have 23.75 staff, and those are all in different areas. We have our accounts payable, our accounting / general ledger, capital analyst, the budget staff, and our procurement staff, as well as our Oracle ERP leads. Right, and then we also have, looking down here at the school and county shared buildings, this is payments that we get from the county towards expenditures at buildings that we share. So most of the funding in the finance department is for staff. We have a little bit for other necessary things like our auditors and actuarial consultant that we use every year, and then software maintenance for our student activity fee software. Student activity fund software, I shouldn't say fee, sorry. And administrative accounts. Now these are really system-wide costs that happen to be housed in the finance budget. $11.7 million worth. We have all of our capital leases. The payments for our technology that we finance short term is in there. Back in 2020, there was a compensation contingency that was 2.1 million of the 11.7. It was for a specific piece from the last compensation study where we were bringing a couple of scales to market by phasing in an increase each year, and that's what that contingency was for. We have our OPEB reserve. That's our contribution to the OPEB trust fund every year. We did have furniture and equipment for new schools and whatnot. There was $2.6 million in this particular year because we had some schools that were opening, so we had a lot more money in there than we typically do. Typically, we have a couple $100,000, and that was eliminated in the FY22 budget. Legal fees, I can tell you it's more than that now, and then we also have our general counsel office now as well, and then a few other small amounts in that budget. School and community relations, this is our communications office. Again, mostly staff, some other funding for some smaller things like our school talk, our website. And then this also includes our printing services department that helps print all of the items that schools need, including, handbooks and the budget document and things like that. Facilities and operations, one of the larger budgets, again. It encompasses a variety of areas: facilities and operations, which is really the management of facilities, risk management, insurance and whatnot, plant operations, custodial, which is custodial services, and then other plant operations split out because some is in schools and some is in other buildings. Maintenance, our maintenance department, and then transportation. And obviously a lot of staff because it's a very service-oriented department with transportation and custodial and maintenance. In the facilities and operations management budget, mostly staff, just a few other expenditures in there. Risk management, primarily our building leases and insurance, and a couple of staff and their equipment and vehicles. Plant operations, mostly staff, again, including itinerant custodians that are used to fill in around the district where needed, and then also go in the evenings and provide additional support to the custodians who are there cleaning. We have some contracts, mowing, pest control, trash and recycling services, and then other various small expenditures. Plant operations, again, these are for the buildings that aren't schools. And then electricity, heating, fuel, and water, our utility bills. And then our maintenance staff, our maintenance department, mostly staff. A lot of HVAC and maintenance and repair funding. And then everything else, as you can see there. And then transportation, which is primarily staff with some buses, fuel, and repairs. Information services, again, number of staff in that area. Service support center includes all of our technicians and all of our network people. We have the information services management, our support center, mostly staff, but we also have replacement equipment. IS does the copiers in all of the buildings, equipment maintenance, telephone services, any software. And then enterprise solutions, that staff is primarily tasked with keeping our ERP system going, doing the student information system, the data warehouse. And then, in the pandemic, there's been a lot more need for people to keep the system up and running with the wireless network, adding spots and providing additional service to students and families. All right, so that's where the FY 2020 presentation portion ended. And then I added in a few slides to talk about what FY 22 budget looks like on a summary level basis. So the slides that we saw at the very, very beginning that talked about the distribution of funds, I just want to show us what it looks like today for the FY 22 budget, because there are a couple other things that I want to talk about when we look at this. So this is the total revenue. Obviously, county transfer is the biggest piece of our budget for the funding for our budget overall, followed by state revenue and then local fees. We also have a significant amount of reserves, and carry forward is also included in there. What I wanted to point out tonight for FY 22 that is different is the amount of one-time funding that is included in the budget. So in the county transfer, that 75.5% includes $2.8 million in one-time funds. The federal funding at 5.1% includes the $18.9 million in ARPA funds that we used to help close the gap in FY 22. And then our reserves, because their reserves are, by definition, one-time funds, and we use $21.7 million there. So overall, we used $43.3 million in one-time funds, which is 6.2% of the overall revenue in our budget. And this is concerning, right? Because we're talking right now, we were just talking about the budget direction and how compensation is a big focus. But we're looking at a budget right now that as we start the process for FY 23, we've already lost $43.3 million in revenue. So we're already behind that amount of money before we start thinking about all the new things that we want to add in. On the distribution of funds, the school operating fund, again, largest portion of our budget. The second largest is our debt service, and then all of the various other funds. And what I want to show here is that the debt service fund, the Food and Nutrition Services Fund, the Children's Services Act Fund, and the Grants and Restricted Programs Fund. The Grants and Restricted Programs Fund and the Food and Nutrition Services Fund are self-supporting. In other words, their revenue, whatever their revenue is, that's what their expenditures are. So, and the Food and Nutrition Services Fund, as I said, is a federal thing. We don't provide any funding to the Food and Nutrition Services Fund. There's no county transfer that goes there. So if we're talking about making cuts to the budget, we have to exclude the Food and Nutrition Services Fund, because there's no savings to be gained by doing anything there. Same with the Grants and Restricted Programs Fund. The grant comes in, we spend the grant, it's a one-to-one. There's no county transfer there. So Grants and Restricted Programs Fund, we don't make cuts there to help the rest of the budget. The Children's Services Act Fund is a mandated what am I trying to say, program, and we can't cut it. We can't just say, oh, we're not going to do that anymore. No, we have to fund that, and it does use county transfer. Not that much. I think it's $3 million at the top, at the most, but we can't cut it. And then the debt service fund, we can't cut that either. There is some argument that perhaps maybe we shouldn't be increasing our debt service fund as rapidly as we may be, but we still have to pay the bonds that we've already sold. So we can't cut the debt service fund. And so when you look at that, you're looking at, a large portion of the budget that is taken off the table. I think it's about $90 million right off the top. Can't even consider it for for cuts in the budget, right? We can't reduce that in any way. So that's off the table. So that $700 million budget is now $610 million budget that we have to cut the funding from. And then we're looking at this expenditure summary where we break out how are we actually spending the money. 79.4% on salaries and benefits of the overall budget is spent on salaries and benefits. And that is up from last year because last year it was 78.7%. If you look at that figure in the school operating fund only and don't include, debt service and school food and nutrition services and grants and restricted programs fund, if you don't include any of those, then the salary and benefits in the school operating fund are 88.9% of the budget. So almost 90%, up from 88.2 last year. And then again, debt service is the second largest expenditure that we have. So some things to keep in mind as we move forward in the budget process and the areas in which we can focus. So I hope that helps. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about the presentation or about the budget and how it's put together and where we're going to be looking for savings and those kinds of things. I may not be able to answer the savings part because we've just started the budget process, really.
What might be helpful, I think, because we haven't looked at, do you have a picture handy of the view of the budget cycle? I know there was that circle view that shows where, how it progresses through the year. That might be helpful for some of the newer folks as well.
Sure. Let me see if I can pull that up quickly.
I remember that one, the circle picture. I thought that was extremely helpful.
I know what you want. All right, can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the FY 2023 budget development, and this is unfortunately a little bit small. Let me see if I can, oh, there we go. Look at that. All right, so this is a graphic, and when you do a graphic, you have to kind of pigeonhole things that might not pigeonhole well into some area of the graphic to make it work. So we start preparing for the budget cycle, in I want to say June because we're working on the adopted budget document. But during this time, we start looking at all of these things, and we start looking at putting together the information and whatnot that people are going to need to start working on their budgets. And then this is also the time that the school board starts talking about its budget direction. I think that probably needs to move down into the October to December timeframe, but the discussions do start back in August and September on that. It just may not get approved until a little bit later. And then in the October to December timeframe, this is when we really start engaging on the budget with principals and department heads. And sorry if you can hear all the noise from my urban perch here. But requests from departments and schools, and then we get the September 30th enrollment. The Planning and Evaluation Office does their projections, and then they give it to us, and then we do the staffing. We get our second revenue estimate from the county. And then we try to put together the kind of draft budget by winter break. And then in January, there's some executive leadership team review, now cabinet, that extends into January. We'll get another estimate from the county, possibly at this time, and then the superintendent's proposed budget comes out at the end of February. And then in March through June, this is the review process with the school board, with all the work sessions, and then they do their proposed budget. We get a final estimate from the county, then the county approves its budget with whatever it's going to give to the school board that might be in addition to what is generated by the revenue sharing agreement, and then the school board adopts its budget at the beginning of May.
Then you take a break and do it all over again.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Eric, did that cover what you wanted?
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that's, I mean, it's the outer piece that I think it's super helpful to show how things are continually going throughout the year. And at certain quarters, certain months, certain quarters, there's a focus. So.
Jennifer, question.
Yeah, I'm just curious, does APS provide more granularity in terms of on the revenue side, for example, for the federal funds that come in, excluding the one-time funds, but the amounts that come in for Title I and IDEA, which I assume are in that, I think you said we're in that restricted grants sort of section, that sort of a dollar comes in for this, a dollar goes out for that. Same with the food and nutrition. But then I'm just kind of curious about more granularity in terms of the various revenue sources from the state and federal. I assume the county is a pretty fungible pot that comes in and can be used for most things. But I'm curious about sort of further granularity on the revenue side for other pots.
Sure. I feel like you are a shill for me tonight, Jennifer, because that is the best plug I could get for getting people to read the adopted budget document. And I am going to pull that up right now. And hopefully everybody can see that. All you need to do is go to the budget finance page, and you can look up the FY22 adopted budget. You can pull it up like I just did. It's a PDF, but it's easy to navigate. You just go up here to the bookmark part, and you can literally just find anything that you want along here. And what I'm going to show you is the exact answer to Jennifer's question is located here. Move that out of the way so I can see it. We have it all broken out here. You can go to the other funds area, and you can go to the grants and restricted programs fund. It'll take you right there to page 581 of the budget document, and you can see all of the changes that were made in the grants and restricted programs fund, any additional funding that was provided. You can see how local, state, and federal revenue comes into the grant. And then then it's broken out by grants that are funded by federal funds and explanations of those, along with each of the different types of grants that are funded from federal funds and how much, how many staff are provided through those funds, at what schools. And then you can do the same thing for, this is the federal discretionary funds, same information, the adult education grants, state funds, same information, state discretionary grants. And there's a description of each of those grants. Here you can, race to GED funding and what it's used for. And so forth. So it's It is a treasure trove of information. I highly recommend that you read the however many page document this is. I can't even tell you.
A lot.
Yeah, it's really a lot. It's really a lot. It's 696 pages. So there you go.
But always
But-
start with the executive summary.
Yes, yes. And I thank you, Chuck, for taking me there. Yes. If you want a really, really, really good overview of the budget, then you go to the executive summary because, as you might expect from the title, it is a good summary of what's happening in the budget overall. It's pretty specific on the changes in the budget, but it's very summary. It gives you an idea of exactly what's happened in this budget cycle. But the detail is in the latter parts of the budget. So in the schools and in the departments and in the other funds, you really get a good idea of what changes were made in each department, a breakdown, a further breakdown of the budget and the staff and all of those kinds of things. So I hope that answered your question, Jennifer.
Okay. Melanie.
Hi, I had a specific question, but I will just give a plug to what Leslie's talking about first, which is I'll say to our new folks, one of the most helpful things I did in starting on the committee was read the previous year's budget, even before getting in to the current year, because it's a lot when you're absorbing the new budget. So if you aren't someone who's been keeping up and reading the budgets before joining the committee, it can be really helpful to absorb a budget when you're not trying to read it in one weekend to start our work on the committee. So we'll just echo Leslie's comments about digging into the old budgets. But my specific question actually has to do with what Eric was asking about, because I went onto the back page as you were talking to him and realized that the budget calendar that's up on the back page on the website is still last year's. So I know you all do really good detailed calendars, and I started to say, oh, when are things going to be presented to the board in terms of the summaries leading up to it? One of the work sessions going to be when's the superintendent budget dropping? And it looks like it's last year's. So I don't know if you have this year's approved, probably, right? Because they tend to start in the summer. This one starts in July, and it may just be that we haven't gotten the new one up yet, or maybe
We just forgot.
Okay, great.
It was July 1, as it normally is by the school, and it just got lost with, other things going on. Not an excuse, just letting you know.
No, great. And I actually hadn't looked until just now, and another thing for everyone to track, to get those dates on the calendar now so that everyone is knows when those commitments are, since it's so important. So thank you for taking a look at that so we can all get it on our calendars.
And for those who may not have looked at the calendar ahead, right now we have 3 March meetings planned, because March is like that's our go month, because we get the budget at the tail end of February, and then depending on the scope of work we have, it sometimes takes us 3 times to wade through the issues that we're wrestling with. We can always cut back, but I do echo Melanie's point. There are some calendar issues to go ahead and think about now, because March is that's our busy month.
I'm sure that the budget development calendar that's on the budget and finance page is the right one.
Okay, right. I went to the back page, so
right, and you should, but if you wanted it before I can get it posted, because I can't do that. I'm technically challenged in that area. Tamika does all of that for me. So yes, the budget development calendar is on the budget and finance site. So you can check there, but we will get it on the BAC site too. So you can have that.
Thank
And
you.
we'll
And Chuck, that's why it's good to help our new folks learn how to navigate to those places, because I have to admit, my first year, it took me a while to figure out how to navigate to all those places.
Yes, we'll send a few of the links out in the Budget 101 presentation that Leslie gave us, just as you do your own reading and research on this, just to get oriented to the scale of this budget. Jennifer. Jennifer Willock, your hand's up.
Sorry, I meant to take it down. I didn't mean to have it up. Hold on.
Oh, okay. Other questions for Leslie on the 101 presentation? Okay, seeing none. Move to our next item then. And again, thank you, Leslie. Again, for all of us, even if we've been at this a few, it's always helpful to just, one, know where the money is and where it isn't. And, you know, in your, the one advice I would give in your interactions with the community, you know, we all have our neighbors and friends and people who know the work we do and will be more than happy to share their opinions about the things that should not be done. But at the end of the day, there's only so many areas where there are only so many dials we can turn on this budget, given what is kind of discretionary and what really can't be touched. And so as we think about the work ahead, just being able to focus on those areas where we can actually influence the budget, even if it's something that can and should be changed because it's just really not a great idea. But if it's just not in the realm of possible, right, you know, kind of bucket 3, let's, you know, focus on where the money is and where we can make the most impact. And that's, that will help with some degree of sanity when we get to March and the level of work that we will have to do. The next thing I asked Leslie to just talk about, and Monique hinted at it in her bit, but was the county manager has already started to prognosticate a bit upon you know, county revenue and how it's doing. So just asked Leslie if she could give us some insight into the FY23 outlook. Obviously, we all know what's going on in our community, but as things open up and get better, you know, how does that influence the overall budget situation for us? Just at least a little bit of flavor for how things are looking and how they may look ahead to delivery. Oh, you're muted, Leslie.
– Sorry, I had to turn it off because somebody was like drag racing down the street or something. I don't know. Yes, so I'm searching right now on this new county website that I've not seen before. So the county manager a couple weeks ago, did a quick summary, very preliminary view of FY23 to the county board. And in that presentation, he indicated that that revenue was looking better for the county than they had anticipated. I think back in February when they did their projections, their revenue projections, the county was predicting about a 1.45% increase in revenue for FY23. And, you know, that's not a lot of revenue. And of course that affects how much revenue we get because we have that 47% share of revenue. But in his presentation a couple weeks ago, he specifically said that schools could expect to get between 4 and 5% more than what we had received in FY22. So not a 1.45% increase, but a 4 to 5% increase in revenue, which is really extraordinary. And, you know, I'm certainly knocking on wood for this. And, you know, if it can get better, I'm be really happy about that too. I think when I looked at it, it equated to about $21 million on the low end, which is great. And we'll absolutely take all of that. but just to remind everyone that we are starting with that $40 million hole because of the one-time funding that was used in the FY22 budget. So, we have to get back up to the same level as FY22, and then we can start thinking about, adding things in to the budget with, revenue. But certainly very, very optimistic, and I was very happy to hear it, and thrilled that the county is, as a whole, is coming out of this faster than anticipated. So that's great. I don't have any numbers specifically. It was seriously one bullet on one side that schools can expect to get 4 to 5% more than the FY22 budget. So more to come on that.
Leslie, I think this is the one that came up. Is that right? If anyone can see my screen.
Yes. That is exactly it. Thank you. You found it quicker than I did. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions about that if you have any.
And I'll attach this presentation to email after this. But yeah, that's good news. Given the last couple of years have been pretty dire with the impact of COVID and other things. So we share in the game, but we share in the loss too. So I think that's important for all of us to understand that loss of revenue, 47%, we still eat part of the loss if it's a down year. So it does impact. Any questions for Leslie when it comes to the county outlook? Obviously, this will continue to be refined as we get closer to budget delivery, but hopefully some good news coming our way. It may make our work a little bit easier. Won't quite solve it all, but it'll definitely help. Okay. If there are no questions for Leslie, thank you. A lot of good information there. I definitely echo some of the other sentiments about, as you look at what you do between now and February, just to really do your best to understand the budget, how it's made up, and then, where are the realistic areas of concern we can talk once we get a number in February when the budget's delivered about what we can influence or not, if there has to be some balancing act involved. Okay. All right. What I'm going to do now is turn over to Eric. There's a couple policy issues that will be coming up before he starts. I had a meeting with Dr. Cannon today. We do a monthly huddle amongst the different committee chairs. And the topic of today's meeting was there's going to be a policy review about advisory committees. And, obviously we are one of about 8 that directly support the school board. So November 1st, there's going to be a public comment on the advisory committee policy. And then we'll have to make a decision as a body, what we do. Do we provide a consolidated input to that? Do we do it individually? Do we do both? Because you're always free to provide your own input, of course. But then come next spring, there's an implementation plan that is going to be part of this overall policy. And that implementation plan will be specific to the BAC. And Christine Diaz-Torres, who is a BAC graduate, now board member, she is leading this effort. And so we'll have some time with her as this process unfolds about the implementation of this policy with respect to the advisory board. So this will be an opportunity for us to provide feedback to the school board about our role the things that we do as the BAC, but also some of the specifics about how we do our business internally. So definitely something to look forward to here in the coming month. But with that, Eric, over to you.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I guess for those of you who aren't as familiar with the policy review process, I describe it as being basically a rolling and dynamic process. It's rolling in that the policy review teams and the board is continually scheduling policies to be reviewed throughout the year, and they come through on a rolling basis. And so, like right now, there are already policies teed up preliminarily to be reviewed next summer and next fall, and even further. So even out to 18 months out. So they're scheduled that far to be reviewed and discussed. However, it's dynamic in the sense that it's continually being adjusted, and things will move up sometimes, not as often, but more often may slide a month or might slide a few months out. So if you look at the policy page, which is on the APS Engage site, let me turn my camera on. There's and I'll pull it up here in a second. You can see the ones that are currently under review. You can see the whole schedule for the next 18 months. And then when you log in the next time, you may see it probably looks a little different. So the good news is we do have a view of what's coming, what's planned here in the short term, in the medium term, and in the long term, so that we can start thinking about when the right time is to start collecting our own feedback. But we do need to continually check it because it does evolve throughout the year. Then the other thing is just to remind people, with that in mind, there are 3 times where the public can provide input. One is about 6 months out, so roughly 6 months prior to when something is scheduled to be reviewed. They will open up the policy for input on the current language in the current policy. So really what they're doing is they're collecting information up front that they'll pull in, and then they'll go take it all and they'll start the drafting process. So that's the first opportunity, and it's generally about 6 months ahead of time. The second opportunity comes after the policy team has taken the information or taken all the feedback. They create a draft, and then they put that draft out for public comment for 30 days. And so that will appear, and I'll show you in a second, on the when it's up for review. That also appears on the policy page. That can be anywhere from, I've seen it 4 months out. That's not that often, but 3 months out to 2 months out, they'll be looking for policy feedback on the draft. So that's the second opportunity. The third opportunity then is prior to the board meeting that the policy will be reviewed at. It's opened up for additional feedback or input from the community, and that is generally 7 to 8 days prior to the next meeting. And in fact, it was just 6:30 tonight. Thank you, Melanie, for also forwarding that email. But at about 6:30 tonight, they posted the policies that will be reviewed in the board meeting on the 28th. And again, there's an open window now through the Engage page for anybody. Again, any private citizen can go in and provide input on the policy that's going to be discussed at the board meeting. So those are the 3 windows. Let me share my desktop here. And in fact, I'm going to go to the last one first, just as an example. These are the, excuse me. These are the, on the Engage site, these are the policies that are scheduled to be, nope, sorry, got the wrong page. Hold on, I'm scrolling. I apologize. I had it and then I was moving around. So these are the policy drafts. Actually, I'm sorry. Let me go to the top and work my way down instead. Let me do this. So this is the entire list of policies scheduled for the year. It's on the page. You can see it's in order of when they're coming up for action. And they go out through December of 2022 right now. It's broken out in a couple sections on what things are open for review. So board consideration on drafts, for example, they're generally done 1 week ahead of time. These are the ones that actually have been posted to be reviewed and are now open for comment in advance of the board meeting next week. Generally, what I do is I try and look at all of these on a regular basis to find which ones are coming up that might open up for public comment and are coming out 6 months out, where we want to provide input again on the existing policy. And then I'll keep an eye out for the ones where a draft is released and they're looking for input over the 30-day period. And then obviously as the board meeting comes closer, I look at which ones are coming up to see what's going to be discussed. Very often, more often than not, a lot of these really aren't necessarily relevant for the BAC as a whole. Obviously, any individual person might want to contribute or comment, but aren't really relevant for the BAC as a whole. And for the ones coming up for next week, there's really nothing that's in that category for us to contribute as a group. There are two ways to contribute. One is obviously just through the Engage page. But we, as an advisory committee, also have the opportunity to provide enhanced feedback, which is basically then we can write a memo outside of the standard process. I've started using the tool and submit it through our own team to be reviewed and considered by the policy review team and ultimately by the board. So that's generally what we would do for things that are obviously very where we play a pivotal role or can provide some pivotal or key input into the policy. Let me shift over here. What I usually do is, again, I tend to extract them out and look at them. Chuck already mentioned that the there's an advisory committee policy teed up for in December right now, and they will be collecting feedback. We'll want to contribute something to that, as will, I assume, all the advisory committees. And then looking through the schedule, it used to be, in fact, if I looked at this 3 weeks ago, you would have seen in January a number of financial management topics. These, if you can see my screen, these 6 or 7 had actually been scheduled for discussion in the board review for a board discussion in January and February, and sometime between September 8th and earlier this week, they were moved out to May of 22, so not till next spring. So whereas I was going to tee those up for a conversation for us in next month and then in December, we actually might have to hold out on that. And in fact, for those, I'm waiting to hear from the policy review team on whether or not they're going to reopen the review period on the existing language, and or if they're going to reopen the input period for providing input on existing drafts. So once I have that information, we'll be able to know exactly how we may want to engage on these. But these ones in green are all tied to, obviously, the APS financials, and are all ones that we're going to want to contribute to. I think as a group, we'll be able to, address individual policies where we want to, and then we can group some of them together in a memo to talk about them holistically where it makes sense. So there's more to come on these, and I think probably as we get into January, we might be able to start pulling together commentary on some of these policies.
Yeah, and so think about our just deconflicting review of those relative to when the budget falls upon us, and when those opportunities are, so that we have an appropriate level of workload. So something you and I definitely will have to consider how we do that.
Yeah, and there may be ones where we look at it, we may not, and if they reopen the period to say provide input on the existing draft, and it's it's still 6 months out, we may look at some of those and say it may not be necessary for us to comment on all of those, or maybe there's a couple of them that we want to comment on. The others we can pass to and just comment on the draft that comes along. So we'll want to look at those a little more closely as we get some more information from the policy review team.
Yeah, especially just looking at that list, the volume of different funds and topics, they are all pretty much in our wheelhouse. So definitely merits a look, even if we have nothing to say. At least know that we have nothing to say is important.
Yeah, and we may, obviously it might be some extra homework, right? To just, take most of them aren't very long. They don't take a lot of time to read. So, maybe carving out a little bit of time just to kind of go through them.
Yep. Okay. Any questions for Eric on the policy stuff? Okay. We'll get to our last topic. So, for those who provided feedback, I appreciate it. We had a number of different topics that, as we look at, okay, how do we, organize ourselves to learn about different areas of the budget or different topics that have, some degree of financial impact. Always helpful in our workload between now and prior to the March BAC meetings, because our February BAC meeting, the budget won't have been delivered yet. So really that February meeting is our last opportunity to get smart on things that we're interested in prior to the end of the month, when Dr. Duran will deliver the budget. And then at that point, our workload will be dictated by the analysis that we'll have to do between the budget direction, the budget document itself, and then what things may need to be done to help bring the budget into balance. So go ahead and share my screen here, make sure I got the right. So, listed a bunch of different topics that folks had either that we had discussed in the meeting proper last month, or new feedback that was given from, emails and things of that nature. So for those who've been here a bit, I don't think this will be a surprise to those, but hopefully everyone can see my screen. But so choice schools and how they impact the budget seem to be a topic of significant interest to those who provided input, and not a surprise. I know we've talked about it in different ways over the past few years, but obviously that has a lot of different aspects to the budget, not just from the cost itself, but you think about equity and some of the other topics that will come in that. But certainly finding a way to get smart on the choice schools in particular, how they fit into the strategic plan, but obviously their impact on the budget, and just helping inform our work as we go ahead. And then, between equity and transportation, those, kind of 2A and 2B, transportation has been a long running challenge. We've had a couple of different BAC sessions, I know, over the years, focused specifically on our transportation network and ways in which we may or may not be able to gain some efficiency from it. But certainly then with the hiring of an equity officer who specifically looks for this, on behalf of the superintendent, looks at equity, but what does that really mean in budgeting, between what APS is doing itself, but then the work that Ree Goldstein, one of the 5 board members, is doing with what an equity-based budget process might actually look like, certainly seems to be those kind of next two that folks felt pretty strongly about. And then some other areas, obviously the school enrollment report will be key because that'll help shape planning factors and how we staff. The compensation study, which, as many have already spoken to today, the importance of maintaining a competitive salary structure, but obviously one that I would view sustainability of that is important. And then finally, the teaching and learning budget. And you think about what Leslie showed us, things go on behind the scenes in the teaching and learning piece. But then you add on top of that virtual learning and the use of technology and our collective experience as a county on a different way to deliver education. Are there opportunities maybe with teaching and learning to maybe take some things in a slightly different direction, but in a way that might be value added for the budget? And then you see some others there with like CIP, the virtual learning program itself. So, one, I appreciate everyone's input. At this point, really, I think with, Eric and I and Leslie, sit down and look at this input and then start to chart out whom we can bring in over the next few months on these topics, make us smarter on those areas of the budget, give us things that we should be thinking about within these particular areas so that when the time comes in March where some of these items may be part of our decision making in terms of the advice that we're going to give the school board on how to how the budget meets the direction, but also more importantly, if there's a requirement to balance it, what types of things do we recommend to balance the budget? Obviously, the smarter we are going into March, the better. So I'm going to stop there. Any comments or questions about the feedback and the way ahead?
Can we still vote if we haven't yet?
If you haven't yet, I would like it in the next 24 hours, please.
Got it.
And I can resend that. Actually, it should be in the original form. I don't want to resend it because then it might recycle the voting. But yeah, if you can, in the next 24, you can do that, and then I'll snap the chalk line, and then we'll start our coordination with Leslie to figure out who to bring in and give them enough time to be prepared and also to be scheduled. Okay. With that, I have no further items. Are there any questions, comments from anyone before we move to adjourn? Okay, seeing up, Eric.
Yeah, just so one thing I think we also want to think about going forward is I know all the other committees are obviously getting started and kind of move forward this year. It's going to be important that we stay in tune with them and engage with them. And so I think it'd be worthwhile in our agendas and coming meetings to set aside a little bit of time for our liaisons to those teams to just provide everybody with an update.
Okay, and yeah, good catch, and we'll make sure for next month we start to integrate that. Other items. Okay, seeing none. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Seconded.
Second the motion.
Second.
Any opposed? Raise your hand. Okay. All right. Appreciate everyone's time and attention. A reminder, we'll get back on cycle next month. November 10th will be our next meeting. And look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Have a
Good night, everyone.
Good night.